Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining Module 9 of the Living Professional Record Academy, the LPR Academy. And the central question we're tackling is this. In a system built on professional evidence, who actually writes the story of your career?
Right. It's a massive question.
It really is. And I argue that the advisor's strict restraint, their absolute refusal to invent or impose a narrative, is really the only thing protecting the objective truth of the client's record.
Yeah, and I will argue that pure client ownership is, it's a complete illusion. By curating the evidence and defining what language is considered safe, the advisor is actively shaping, really co-authoring, the client's professional identity.
So to understand this clash, we really have to look directly at the rules of engagement for a certified LPR advisor. The material we're analyzing today focuses on the advisor mindset, scope, and practice boundaries.
The core doctrine, basically.
Exactly. It establishes this very rigid, almost sacred boundary. In fact, let's just lay out the exact mandates from the text because they are so specific. It says, the client owns the source layer. The advisor does not decide who the client is.
Right.
The advisor does not invent the client's story. The advisor does not impose a brand. The advisor does not force a career direction.
Which all sounds incredibly noble on paper.
Hold on, let me finish the list.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
It goes on to say, the advisor guides the method. The advisor may ask hard questions, identify unsupported claims, recommend safer language, and help test market lanes. But the record belongs to the client. This protects trust.
And that right there, that is where I think we need to unpack what this actually means in the room with a client. Because saying the record belongs to the client at the end of all that doesn't just make it true.
Well, let's do exactly that. And let's define our terms so we can see the mechanics of this framework. The source layer, it's essentially the raw, unedited data of your career, right?
The verifiable history.
Yes, your performance reviews, your old emails, your project metrics. It's what you actually did. And then the surface document is what the world sees, the resume, the portfolio, the LinkedIn profile built from that raw data.
Right.
So the LPR method is fundamentally about source to surface governance.
Governance being the key word there. It's not just a standard resume writing service.
Exactly. A standard resume technician just looks at a surface document and asks, how do we make this bullet point sound stronger?
Or how do we get past the algorithm?
Right. But an LPR advisor asks a profoundly different question. They ask, what is this bullet claiming and what does your raw source layer actually support? They don't invent the story. They just guide the method.
But you are leaning entirely on the first half of that mandate, which is where I think the whole system contradicts itself.
I don't see a contradiction at all.
Let me jump in, because this is really the crux of my position. The text explicitly says the advisor guides the method, right? And that they may ask hard questions, identify unsupported claims, recommend safer language.
Yes. And then it says, but the record belongs to the client.
You can't just slap the record belongs to the client on the end of a highly interventionist process and call it objective.
It's not an intervention in their life, it's an intervention in the document.
It is absolutely an editorial intervention. The moment an advisor identifies a so-called unsupported claim and recommends safer language, they are actively editing the client's reality. Deciding what language is safe is not a neutral act. It's a governed act. But you cannot separate guiding the method from shaping the story, because the method itself dictates what parts of the story are actually allowed to survive the process.
I completely reject the idea that guiding a governed method is the same as shaping a narrative. We need to ground this in a real scenario, because keeping it abstract does a disservice to the actual mechanics of the framework.
Okay, let's ground it.
Imagine a client. Let's call her a burnt-out healthcare worker. Officially, her title was, administrative assistant at a massive clinic.
Okay.
But in reality, she managed a scheduling for 50 nurses. She handled logistics during a major crisis, and she effectively ran the operations of the floor.
A very common scenario, honestly. People functionally doing jobs way above their official pay grade.
Exactly. So she comes into the advisor's office, exhausted, completely panicked about finding a new job. And she demands that her surface document says Director of Healthcare Operations.
Right. She wants the title that matches the work she actually did.
But she doesn't have the proof for it. Now, if you're a PR agent or a standard resume technician, you just obey. You give her what she wants. You invent the narrative.
You give her the market spin.
Yes, but the LPR Academy explicitly forbids this through the rule of orientation before optimization.
Meaning the advisor has to stop her from just optimizing for the job market.
Right. The advisor has to stop and orient the client. They have to sit down and ask, is this a source problem? Do we just lack the data? Or is it a privacy problem? Is there missing context? By stopping the panic and orienting the client back to the source layer, the advisor actively resists imposing a market-driven, hype-heavy narrative. Think of the advisor as an archivist rather than a PR agent.
An archivist?
Yeah. An archivist helps you organize, catalog, and preserve your historical documents. They tell you which documents are legible and which are damaged. But they absolutely do not forge new letters to make your history look more exciting to a museum curator.
See, you're making the advisor sound like a passive librarian, but let's look at the immense power the archivist actually holds in that room.
They don't hold the power over the client's story.
They absolutely do. The archivist decides which artifacts are worthy of display in the glass case and which stay shoved in the dark cardboard boxes in the basement. And that fundamentally changes the exhibit the public ultimately sees.
But based on evidence, not based on whim?
Let's go back to your healthcare worker. She comes in and wants to claim Director of Healthcare Operations, and your advisor guides her through what the text calls claim mapping.
Right, which is simply taking a desired claim and trying to map it to a verifiable piece of evidence in the source layer.
Exactly. So the advisor maps the claim and says, well, based on my interpretation of your emails and performance reviews, you don't have the proof for director. Let's use safer language. Let's say operations coordinator.
Because that's what the evidence supports.
But the advisor just intervened by steering that exhausted client away from aggressive optimization and toward what the LPR method deems defensible. The advisor is imposing their own professional values onto the client.
They're imposing the reality of governed evidence.
You are telling a desperate person that their desire to shout louder in a crowded labor market is wrong. You're telling them that they must speak quietly but with proof. That is a massive intervention in how she presents herself to the world.
It is not a massive intervention in her identity, though. It is an intervention against a fraudulent surface. I mean, this is exactly why the LPR method enforces the anti-drift rules.
Right, the anti-drift rules.
The rules prevent the advisor from overstepping. The advisor must not drift from source into surface or from rendering into invention.
Sure.
If that healthcare worker insists on inflating a claim beyond what the evidence supports, the advisor is instructed to offer safer language, yes, or decline to write a false claim altogether.
And see, there is the ultimate gatekeeping.
It's not gatekeeping her truth. It's gatekeeping the record. The advisor's effectively saying, look, you own your truth. You live that experience, and no one can take away the fact that you felt like a director.
But I won't write it down.
But I will not use my professional competence to render a falsehood on a governed document. That restraint doesn't take away her ownership. It ensures the record remains factual and trustworthy to anyone who reads it.
But in the professional sphere, evidence and truth are functionally collapsed together. The doctrine explicitly states the advisor does not own the client's truth.
Right.
Yet if the advisor refuses to render her claim because they, the advisor, deem it unsupported by the evidence, the advisor is acting as the ultimate judge of her truth.
They are judging the evidence, not the internal lived experience of the client.
But if you are judging what part of her lived experience is actually allowed to be formalized on paper, you are judging her truth.
I think that's a stretch.
It's not. Think about it. When the advisor tells a client that their leadership claim lacks claim maturity, meaning it doesn't have enough verified data to hold up under scrutiny, the method is dictating the client's identity.
Only on the record.
But the record is what gets her the job. If the client knows she was a leader, but her documentation doesn't meet the advisor's threshold for claim maturity, the advisor's refusal to render that claim means the client's truth is completely silenced in the marketplace. That directly contradicts the idea that the client retains total ownership. The client only owns the source layer as long as the advisor agrees with how it's being mapped.
Look, you are conflating a professional service with absolute personal validation. I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, wait, isn't the advisor just acting like a therapist who also edits resumes? That is exactly the trap the material is trying to avoid.
I'm not saying they're a therapist.
But you're treating the document like a diary. The advisor is not a therapist, and their job is not to validate the client's internal feeling of being a leader. Their job is to help the client navigate systems that demand proof.
Even if the system is rigged?
Yes. And you're assuming the client's ultimate goal is just getting hired at any cost, even if they have to inflate their record. This is exactly why the material introduces one of its most profound doctrines, dignity before the record.
Which is a beautiful philosophical stance, I'll admit, but I really question how it survives contact with reality.
It survives because it has to. The text explicitly states that proof is not dignity. A person's worth does not depend on their evidence or their employability or their professional surfaces.
True.
Unemployed clients, workers with undocumented labor, people with caregiving gaps, they do not have less dignity because their evidence is thin. If we just optimize for the market, if we just give the client the hyped-up title they want, we treat the client like a product.
I hear that. I do.
By maintaining strict practice boundaries, the advisor protects the client from the toxic premise that they must serve the record. The record is supposed to serve the worker.
Look, I don't disagree with the ethical intent of dignity before the record. Stating that human dignity comes before evidence is a crucial pushback against a hyper-optimized surveillance-heavy hiring culture.
Right.
But put yourself back in the room with that healthcare worker. The material addresses a specific phenomenon it calls silence fatigue.
Yeah, where the client is just exhausted by the lack of feedback.
Exactly. So our healthcare worker looks at the advisor and says, the whole system is broken. No one reads these documents anyway. Algorithms filter everything out. Just lie for me. Make me sound like a director so I can get an interview and feed my family.
And the advisor's response, according to the text, must be orientation without false hope. They cannot control the low feedback overloaded system. They can only improve governed evidence.
Right. The client is drowning in a broken labor market. She is begging for a raft, and you, the advocate, are offering a masterclass in buoyancy physics.
That's not fair.
I mean, is prioritizing governed evidence over aggressive market optimization truly serving a desperate client, or is it just protecting the LPR method's intellectual purity?
It is serving the client because a raft built of lies, which is exactly what a hyper-optimized, unevidenced resume is, will immediately sink the moment a hiring manager stress tests it.
Assuming they even get an interview without the lies.
But if they do, if the advisor abandons their restraint and says, fine, let's inflate your claims, let's pretend you were the director, what happens when she actually sits in the interview?
Well,
What happens when they ask for the budget she supposedly managed or the direct report she supposedly fired? The paint washes off the life preserver and she sinks.
it's a risk, sure.
She is exposed. And her professional reputation is damaged. The restraint isn't about protecting the method's purity, it's about protecting the client from the catastrophic failure of a fraudulent surface.
Protecting her by controlling her. You keep returning to this idea that the advisor is just objectively matching facts to paper. But let's look at another mechanic in the text, testing market lanes.
Okay.
This is where the advisor takes the client's governed evidence and sees how it plays against actual job descriptions or recruiter expectations, right?
A highly necessary step to ensure the surface document actually functions in the real world.
Sure, but how do you test market lanes neutrally? You can't. The advisor looks at the job market, looks at the client source data, and starts shaping the presentation to fit what the market wants while supposedly staying within the bounds of the evidence.
But they stay within the evidence.
The material demands that the advisor protect the method by protecting the client's source layer. But in doing so, the advisor wields immense power over what that source layer is actually allowed to say out loud.
I disagree.
The doctrine says the advisor does not decide what the client must disclose, but by mapping claims, identifying proof gaps, and testing market lanes, the advisor is constantly signaling what should be disclosed to be effective.
Look, signaling what is effective based on market data is completely different from forcing a disclosure. The material is incredibly strict about privacy. Privacy always comes before proof.
But
if a client has a massive gap in their resume because they were dealing with a medical issue, The record preserves that context safely in the source layer, but the rendering, the surface document, focuses only on supported professional evidence without overexposing their personal details.
Right, but
The client holds the ultimate veto power of what gets published.
they are vetoing options that the advisor has already curated. The advisor is the one who says, this claim is immature, let's use safer language. The advisor is the one who decides when an action drifts from legitimate positioning into unacceptable personal branding.
Which the anti-drift rules strictly forbid.
Exactly. The advisor is constantly policing the boundary between professional evidence and market hype. You cannot be the neighborhood police officer, directing traffic, telling people where they can and can't walk, and then claim you aren't shaping the behavior of the neighborhood.
Well,
The advisor's curation profoundly shapes the very source layer they claim the client owns.
I think we have to distinguish between shaping the presentation of the evidence and shaping the truth of the evidence.
Is there a difference, practically?
Absolutely. When you look at the mechanics of Module 9 holistically, it acknowledges that guiding a client naturally involves influence. Any professional relationship does. I mean, if you hire a lawyer, an accountant, or an LPR advisor, their expertise influences your choices.
True. But adhering strictly to these practice boundaries, no unsupported claims, no outcome guarantees, no forcing a career direction, is the only way to build a sustainable, trusted record.
Because without those boundaries, the LPR framework just degrades into another resume mill, spinning out fiction.
Precisely. And that's why the text hammers home the idea that the advisor's professional power comes from their restraint just as much as their skill.
The restraint is the service. Yes, that restraint, that absolute refusal to drift into invention or play the toxic game of employment guarantees is the ultimate protection. It protects the integrity of the market, sure, but more importantly, it protects the client's dignity and the actual verifiable truth of their professional life.
And while I genuinely admire the nobility of that intention, and I see the structural logic of the anti-drift rules, my position really remains that true separation between guiding a method and shaping a narrative is practically impossible.
Even with the boundaries?
Especially with them. Governance is an exercise of power. The text gives the advisor the authority to define what constitutes evidence, what language is deemed safe, and what claims are mature enough to render.
Based on a framework, though.
Well, in doing so, the advisor acts as a filter, an editor, and a judge. You can call it source-to-surface governance all day long, but the advisor profoundly shapes the reality of the client, making the idea of pure client ownership a beautiful but ultimately theoretical concept.
Well, it is an incredibly delicate balance, without question. And the tension we've explored today is exactly why Module 9 of the LPR Academy is such a critical text.
Oh, absolutely.
It raises fascinating, difficult questions about the balance of power between a professional guide and the individual they are guiding through complex systems.
It really forces you to step back and ask who really writes the story of your career. I mean, is it you? Is it the automated systems and algorithms you're trying to navigate? Or is it the professionals you hire to help you translate your worth into proof?
Exactly. We've spent a lot of time today exploring how hard it is to untangle the guide from the journey. And we'll leave it to you, the listener, to decide where that line truly falls.
Yeah, think about it.
When someone helps you map your claims, recommend safer language, and test market lanes, are they just shining a light on your truth, or are they holding the pen? Think about your own professional surfaces, your own source layer, and ask yourself, who really owns the narrative? Until next time.